grew up in a haunted town. Foster, Rhode Island has more ghost stories than people, and you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who hasn't seen something strange in these woods. One ghost story in particular stands out from the rest. The old Ramtail Factory and the ghost of the night watchman who still roams the factory grounds. They say on some dark nights you can see the light of his lantern floating amidst the trees, and every so often the copper clang of a phantom bell tower peals over the hills at the stroke of midnight. That's what they say, at least. By the back half of the month of May, the forest wears a veil of green so present that the thought of life without it is barely imaginable. As the days and nights begin to warm, life bursts through the wet dirt of late spring like neurons electric with the memories of springtimes past. Peleg Walker died on May 19, 1822. According to the legend heard by every kid who grew up in Foster, Peleg Walker hanged himself from the bell tower of the haunted Ramtail Factory. The truth turns out to be a bit stickier, as truth often does. But regardless of the particulars, the Foster Woolen Manufacturing Company in 1885 gained the dubious honor of being Rhode Island's only officially haunted location, as recorded by the census. Of course, by the late 1800s, the textile industry in Rhode Island was on its way out. The land that the Ramtail Factory sat on had been sold numerous times for increasingly insulting sums of money. It could have been just a way for the Barden Reservoir Company, who ended up owning it by 1885, to get out of paying property taxes on a piece of land that no one else wanted to buy. And if there was any place you'd be able to get away with that, it'd be the Ramtail Factory. The legends at that point were already well known. And that legend goes something like this. There used to be an old factory behind the graveyard off Ramtail Road. The factory was owned by William Potter and his partners, which were his sons and his son-in-law, Peleg Walker. One day, Peleg Walker was stripped of his partnership and demoted to the night watchman. As the night watchman, he would walk the factory grounds holding his lantern every night. And before first light, he would climb the bell tower and ring the bell that would summon all the workers to the factory to make shirts for 16 hours a day or something. One day, Peleg got into another dispute with the rest of the partners, probably about money. He ended that dispute by storming off and yelling these dramatic words. He said, "The next time you open this factory, you'll have to take the keys out of a dead man's pocket." The other partners basically laughed at him, thinking it was the desperate plea of a sad and broken man. They didn't think anything of it. Until the next morning, when the bell to summon the workers never rang. And so the Potters, wondering what was wrong, went to the factory and they found the door to the bell tower locked, and kicked down the door, ran up the stairs, and they found that Peleg Walker had hanged himself from the bell with the keys to the factory dangling out of his pocket. Shortly after that, the ghost story started. Workers said that when they came to the factory one day, they found all the machines running by themselves, just producing textiles by themselves, which was impossible. They said that one day, when they came into the factory, the water wheel was spinning backwards against the current of the Dolly Cole Brook. The legends grew. People would see the lantern floating in the woods. They'd hear the bell tower. There are people alive today who say they've heard the bell tower, despite a fire destroying the factory in the 1830s. There are people from then till now who said they heard the phantom bell tower. It's a great story. Real spooky. That bit about the keys out of a dead man's pocket, it's perfect. It's a perfect ghost story. But probably not true. There hasn't been a lot of research done on the Ramtail Factory because, well, it's one ghost story in a town of 5,000 that's been a town of 5,000 since 1790. Local writer and researcher Tom DiAgostino did do a lot of the on-the-ground research, digging through land deeds and diaries and all this stuff, and he wrote a great book called Rhode Island's Haunted Ramtail Factory. Highly recommend it. It's the source of most of this information. Here's the real story, as best as we know. The Foster Woolen Manufacturing Company was founded in 1813 by Squire William Potter, expanding on a series of other factories that his father had purchased 23 years prior. At the time, the Foster Woolen Manufacturing Company, which came to be known as the Ramtail Factory, was the largest water-powered textile mill that had ever been built in Foster. And for such a large business, Squire William Potter needed partners. To this end, he chose his son Olney Ellis, his brother-in-law Jonathan Ellis, and his son-in-laws Marvin Round and Peleg Walker. Business was booming at first. It must have seemed like the start of an empire. The company gobbled up land in Foster, and the individual partners themselves branched out and purchased their own businesses and land. Peleg Walker himself bought 25 acres of land completely surrounding the Ramtail factory. Completely surrounding. There was no way in or out of the factory without crossing over Peleg's land. As Tom DiAugustino points out, a shrewd businessman might have seen a lucrative opportunity in owning such a parcel. But that land wasn't all that Peleg Walker bought. He also bought a sawmill, a grist mill, one half of a house, and some undeveloped land, all in Burrville, a couple towns north. He then bought $1,000 worth of shares of the manufacturing company from Olney Ellis Potter. Records show that Peleg didn't really have the funds to do all this. He was a man that lived well beyond his already substantial means. He was in debt to the Foster Woolen Manufacturing Company to the tune of $500, $600. Yet his house was full of mahogany dining tables, fine linens, very nice things, which would be reasonable to assume that the people he was in debt to weren't too happy about him buying all these mahogany dining tables. Regardless, in March of 1822, Peleg began to sell off some of his holdings. The Burrville properties he sold half of the interest to his brother-in-law William A. Potter. And thus began the short-lived firm of Walker and Potter. It'd be a beautiful partnership for just over 2 months, because in May of 1822, Peleg Walker was dead. On Sunday, May 19th, 1822, Peleg Walker was missing. Looking for him, the Potters went to the factory and they found the door to the bell tower was locked. So they kicked it down, and there they saw a trail of blood dripping down the stairs. They ran up the stairs and they found the body of Peleg Walker, having slit his own throat. Hell of a way to go. We know all this from the diary of a woman named Mary Williams, who lived and worked at the factory. Now, it's a far cry from the bell tower hanging of legend. One makes a much spookier ghost story. One's a lot darker. It's interesting, though, that in the days and weeks leading up to Peleg's death, while yes, there are records of him selling off various bits of his property, there's nothing to indicate that he was suicidal. He wasn't clearing up affairs or doing anything. He was conducting business as normal. The only unusual things were a series of 3 land deeds filed 2 days before his death at the Foster Town Hall. These series of deeds represented the transference of Peleg Walker's land from him, through his father-in-law, Squire William Potter, to Olney E. Potter. What's suspicious about these land deeds is that they were all signed at midnight, in a time before electric lights. Land deeds weren't signed, that you didn't conduct business at that time. Also curious is that, in contrast to every other land deal that Peleg Walker was involved in, these were not witnessed by his wife, but instead witnessed by distant relatives of Peleg's that lived in Providence, 20 miles away. Now, after Peleg's death, through one route or another, everything he owned ended up in the hands of his brother-in-law, Olney E. Potter. Everything ended up in the hands of Olney E. Potter. It wasn't just Peleg's holdings and land that he ended up with, but all the other shares of the company ended up in Olney's hands. He must have lived like a king for a while. 9 years later, May 15th, 1831, Olney E. Potter died. Cause of death is not recorded. But it's interesting that it was almost 9 years to the day, and in one regard, exactly 9 years to the day. Peleg Walker died on the 3rd Sunday in May, May 19th, 1822. Olney E. Potter died on the 3rd Sunday in May, May 15th, 1831. Also curious is that on both those days, the sunrise and sunset happened at the exact same time. Sunrise at 4:40 a.m., sunset at 7:20 p.m. It's a little spooky. Now, to say what happened to Peleg Walker, to say what happened to Oney E. Potter would be baseless speculation. But since baseless speculation is the great American pastime, let's do it. Could it be that 9 years after he murdered his brother-in-law, in cold blood, for the shares of the textile mill that they had worked so hard to build together, could it be that Oney Potter spent 9 long years being haunted by the ghost of Peleg Walker, to the point where he couldn't take it anymore, he couldn't live with the guilt anymore, and he took his own life? We don't know. We have no idea. We have no idea if there was any foul play at all. It's just another one of those stories. There seems to be truth in the legend, just exaggerated. And, I mean, my own bias is that, oh yeah, Peleg got murdered. Yeah, for sure. But we don't know. And is it haunted? Maybe. I don't know. People swear they've seen very, very strange things there. And it definitely has a spooky feel to it. It definitely has a spooky vibe, for sure. But the Ramtail Factory land was sold over and over and over again until it ended up in the hands of the Barden Reservoir Company. It was listed on the 1885 census as haunted and passed into legend. Oral history. Oral swamp Yankee history. And no one knows what really happened. The only person who knows the truth about the Ramtail Factory is Peleg Walker. I haven't met him yet.